Hey guys, you're very welcome to this week's episode of Are We There Yet? And we've got something slightly different this week. I am so looking forward to hearing this conversation because I am chatting to journalist and author Sally Hayden. I have been a huge fan of this girl's work. We've both travelled the world as journalists, but in very different guises because she reports from the front line of various wars, various crises to ensure that she can bring people the information that we need. We've all watched live streaming from Gaza and from Ukraine over the last number of years and can feel completely overwhelmed by what we see. But what's it actually like reporting from the front line and putting yourself out there? And how do you protect and keep your boundaries as a journalist reporting on such things? She's written a new book called This Is Also a Love Story, reminding us about the humanity away from the headlines. It is such a powerful read, highly recommended, and can't wait for you to hear this conversation today. Sally, it is so lovely to have you in the Are We There Yet studio.
Thanks so much for having me.
The book is brilliant. This is your second book. This is also a love story, searching for good in a divided world. And people will know you, like you are a war correspondent, an amazing journalist, award-winning. You've reported and continue to report them from some of the most dangerous places in the world. So tell me about this book, which is essentially about love. Tell me about it and where, I suppose, the original idea came from.
Yeah, thanks so much. So, I mean, people actually keep calling me a war correspondent. I wouldn't say I'm a war correspondent, but I have been reporting internationally since around 2013, 2014, and I've reported on a lot of different crises. So not just war, but humanitarian disasters, drought and inequality, exploitation, migration, a lot of issues around human rights abuses. And so I started doing that, as I said, around 2013, 2014. And within a few years, I just became really sad, to be honest. So I'm sure actually I'd be interested in your thoughts on this too, honestly, because I think maybe when you're starting out, you kind of have these grand notions of both changing the world and also having adventures. This is like a cool thing to do. And actually you realize very quickly that the world is a very cruel and horrible place. And you see a lot of really terrible things that, that change you, I guess. And I think that I very quickly started feeling very sad, I would say. And not that I didn't believe in the importance of journalism, but I realized, that just that, these horrible things are happening and there's not always a clear answer, or at least there's not always an answer that's actually coming very quickly. And I started thinking about 2018 that, yes, it was true that all of these terrible things are happening, but it's also true that you see love everywhere. And so it sounds very basic, but, I was thinking maybe I want to write a book that focuses on the kind of goodness of humans as well. And the fact that, yes, you see these terrible things, but in every situation that I'm in, I also see love, not just for, romantic love, but love for family members, love for community. But that's not the part that makes the news, but that actually always exists as well. So I decided I was going to write the book 2018. And then I got, if anyone knows my work, I wrote another book, My Fourth Time We Drowned. And that begins with a Facebook message I received from refugees who were in a Libyan migrant detention center. And that came in August 2018. And so I basically started working on what was happening to them and this kind of huge migration, they call it migration crisis, but basically human rights abuses that were happening on Europe's borders. And I started reporting on that daily from 2018. And initially I wasn't writing a book, but eventually it became a book, and that published in 2022, basically a collection of evidence of what I had collected. And when that book came out, I then started thinking, I had this other book. So actually the second book published was my first idea. I started thinking again, I had this idea for another book and maybe I could still write that as well. So anyway, sorry, that was a long answer, but basically This Is Also a Love Story collects stories from 9 different countries, 9 different crises, But I mean, it's not totally disconnected from my first book, because it's both about love and, you know, some of the kind of ways that it's motivated people that I've seen and some of the courageous things they've done for love. But it's also about, you know, just remembering that there are humans caught up in the middle of these situations. And, you know, in the middle of geopolitics, there's always human beings, you know, who are experiencing things. And that's kind of the main message of the book, to remind people of that. You know, you see headlines and you might think you kind of know what's happening somewhere, as you know from your work as well, but it doesn't really get across the kind of broader tapestry of the experiences of people there.
Yeah, just when you were talking about journalism there, and I did No Frontiers, which was the travel show. And I started doing that when I was 21, and I did it for a decade. So I spent most of my 20s traveling, but in a very different light and type of journalism than you started in. I mean, I was promoting holidays and adventures and all this, but then you would go to places like Africa, and you go to places like Rwanda or Uganda, and we'd be doing the silverback gorilla tours. But when you're there, you get an idea of actually a country's past, the unrest that currently exists. You know, places like Cambodia, where you'd go and you'd see the killing fields in Angkor Wat. So, like, very early on, I suppose, in my own journalism, I sort of was woken up to the fact, and I suppose guilted in a way as well, to go, yeah, I felt a certain responsibility to not only showcase what was happening from a tourism perspective, but also maybe I did some work with Concern, trying to go back to Africa to showcase what was, showcase is the wrong word, to kind of highlight for people maybe genuine crises and human suffering out there. And I think now the fact that the last couple of years, what we have just been witness to, and what the world has witnessed in terms of Ukraine, in terms of Gaza, you talk in this book about the kind of how we've become desensitized to various crises and world suffering. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit? Because I think lots of people may be feeling that way.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously can't speak for everybody, and I know that a lot of people are very engaged in what's happening, but I do think that there's a kind of detachment crisis, is what I call it, going on. The Reuters Institute, which publishes very kind of well-regarded studies into journalism and the role of journalism, has found that around 40% of people globally are often or sometimes deciding to just not pay attention to the news. And I mean, I've felt that, you know, I'm a journalist, and I still, you know, it's my job to follow the news, and I still have days, of course, where I'm like, I just can't read about this. I just can't watch this. It's too devastating. And at the same stage, I do think that, like, you can't just switch off from it, because this is the world we live in, you know, this is the reality. And whatever people in Ireland, you know, countries don't exist in isolation. We're all connected to each other. And yeah, it's important that we, you know, don't effectively bury our heads in the sand. And of course, yeah, like, I mean, there's all issues around, you know, injustice and global inequality and all of this as well, which, you know, we play a role in. But I do think that, yeah, it's certainly, it's a very strange time we're living in. And I don't think we fully understand the implications of, like, the fact that now we can pull out a phone, you know, from our pocket and see atrocities taking place thousands of miles away. And the kind of fact that we could be seeing that so many times in a day. And yeah, does that lead to people totally disengaging? It seems to, in some cases, do that. And, you know, that's not good, you know. No. So, but that's not to say that you have to be watching this all of the time.
And you hear the argument that people become overwhelmed. I mean, literally what we were witnessing in Gaza and seeing children, live stream children in the middle of a genocide. And then you'd scroll on, and the next thing you could see an ad for a pizza. Do you know what I mean? This is the kind of, it's the absolute both ends of the scale of seeing one thing and witnessing one thing, and then your life returning to normal in 2 seconds, and people becoming sort of overwhelmed by that, and then not being able to, as you say, and then switching off. It's worrying.
Yeah, I mean, and I think there's also a kind of, hopefully I explained this right, there's another risk as well, which is, even if you're paying attention all the time, that there can be another type of dehumanization in that you maybe just see these people as victims, or just see like dehumanization comes in lots of ways, you know. And because I've been living in Lebanon, for example, for the last 2.5 years, and obviously there's been kind of ongoing war there too. And I had a kind of strange experience, which hopefully won't make sense if I try and explain it. But I don't know if people followed the April 8th attacks, where hundreds of people were killed all in, 10 minutes. Basically, there was like Israeli airstrikes on at least 100 different locations all at the same time. I mean, I was in Beirut when that happened, and you could hear these airstrikes. It was like rumbling, like it just went on and on and on. And there was an airstrike that hit like quite close to where I was staying, and I went out and reported on this afterwards. Like, it was absolutely horrific. It was so awful. I think I went to 9 different sites, and civilians were killed, and you could see the evidence of that. And it was just a really like horrible, bleak time. And a few days later, I went into a hospital, and I was interviewing the head of the hospital, about what had happened. And he was talking me through the whole thing. And afterwards, we finished the official interview, and normally I ask people, is there anything you think isn't being covered about the broader situation? Is there anything you think we should be reporting, in the future, for example? And he said, one thing that I don't think is understood more internationally is that Lebanese people are actually very funny. Like, and I was like, what? Like, that's such a strange thing to say at this moment. But it's actually something I've heard echoed from others, is that they feel like not only are these kind of horrors being perpetrated, but also the humanity is being stripped in a way. So it's like the kind of fullness of you as a human is being reduced, and it's just this bad thing that's happening. And hopefully I'm explaining this properly.
No,
it's
totally.
Like, it's like not, both the atrocities are terrible, but also it's this stripping of kind of the kind of fullness of being a human that also can really kind of, feel very hurtful to people. And both of those things are linked, I think, because, if you kind of portray people as not being all the kind of complexities of humans, then it almost becomes easier to say, oh, that sort of thing always happens there, or that, that country is always at war, or these things are normal in that part of the world. People are used to it. And actually, like, nobody's ever used to these terrible things happening. There's no way to say that this is normal.
I think the quote from Elon Musk at the beginning of the book, where he says the fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy. And I think that just sets a lot up about what you are trying to do in the book, which is basically take back humanity from the headlines in these situations and in these countries where you put real people and you put real stories and real stories of love into countries that we can kind of blanket tag as a crisis country, or somewhere that's always happened before. And was that a kind of an on purpose way, Sally, of going, I have been reporting on this and it's not hitting home, and why is nobody taking action, or why is the world not getting angrier about a situation like this? Was it a way for you personally to kind of try and come at it another way for people to sit up and take notice?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a broader sense, it was that it did kind of start out, like I said, as me just trying to remind myself that there is goodness. That I think initially I started writing the book for myself, because but I think other people agree. But for me, I needed to remember that, that people can do good things for each other, and that, that love exists effectively. But I think that like a lot of it, because like I said, it ended up being 8 years that I was kind of working on this on and off. And so in that time, my thoughts kind of developed, but I'm not the most like self-reflective, and I'm not the best at, what we do as journalists. It's like you're talking to everybody else, you're kind of portraying what they say. And so I think like it took me a while, and people can read it. It's just the prologue and the epilogue are more kind of me also thinking through or making sense of some of the things that I've seen and what's happening in the world at the moment. And I have to say, it's not like I, totally answer the question, but like in my ideal world, this would at least provoke other people to continue a conversation as to how can we have a better world, like what's gone wrong, because it's clear that, you know, things are really going wrong and have gone wrong. And I think that if people read it and they were asking those questions, that would be brilliant. And I think that it's been very meaningful for me to have. I actually don't know how, because the book like only just got published, but somehow it's already made its way to Lebanon, and people have been messaging me from there, and they've been saying, you know, this is actually like, we really appreciate this. This is capturing, you know, some of the disconnect that we're feeling. Like, how can all of these things be coexisting in one world? We have someone said to me, they were interviewing me recently, and they said, you know, it reads a bit like you're having an existential crisis. And I was like, of course I'm having an existential crisis. Like, shouldn't we all be having an existential crisis right now? Like, what is this? Yeah, what is this world that we're living in? So,
which can feel so overwhelming at times. And like, let's get into some of the stories in the book, because Ukraine is where you start. That's the first story, where we meet Irina and Sergei, a couple whose love for each other is incredible and so powerful, written in your words. And like, I'm chatting to you, and Ukraine is kind of now almost called the forgotten war. And only yesterday, I think it was the biggest bombardment from Russia on Ukraine, and we are still here all these years later. So maybe talk to us about Irina and Sergei and your time with them.
The book opens with the chapter in Ukraine. I went there in 2023. Actually, for Christmas, I went there. I interviewed a lot of people. So my original idea was that I'd go out, and I'm sure people know the background, but what happened in Ukraine after the full-scale invasion in February 2022 was that men in particular of a certain age were forbidden from leaving the country. And while many volunteered, others have since been conscripted. And I wanted to know, like, what does that, like, this sounds very nosy, but I mean, that's our job as a journalist, isn't it? I was thinking anyway, I wonder what impact that has had on personal relationships. And I basically thought maybe I should try and go there. And I started reaching out to people. And it became clear quite quickly that there were a lot of women in particular whose partners had ended up fighting, who really wanted to talk about this, you know? So I went to Ukraine and I met quite a lot of women. I think only 2 ended up in the final book, but it was influenced by many, many more. And they were speaking about, like the impact that this has on your relationship, that suddenly your partner, you know, and there are women fighting too, but it tends to be men, that, their partner ended up, you know, being on the front lines. So they don't know when they'll see him again. Some of them had children, you know, they're taking care of they're suddenly they're a single parent, which they didn't anticipate. Like the one who's fighting, like, might suddenly get leave, or the leave might be cancelled, or, you know, it's very sporadic and indefinite when they'll see each other. Irina and Sergei, Irina basically met me and just talked to me for hours about Sergei. Like, she loved him, or she loves him so much. And she described him, you know, being very handsome with a mustache like Salvador Dali, and told me all about how they met. And she basically just talked to me for hours. And
they ran a publishing company together.
Yeah, they set up a publishing company. They still have it. And she then at some point, like hours into our initial conversation, I think, or maybe our second conversation, she said, "Do you want to know what it's like to be lonely?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, tell me." And she basically talked to me about how, you know, how it's been being on her own, how they maintain the relationship, how they stay in touch, you know, the trauma that he's experienced, because he's like, pretty much everybody fighting on the front line, I guess, is having kind of PTSD symptoms, or like some kind of trauma symptoms when they come back. You know, they can't be in crowds. They have to like really control kind of their perimeters for a period of time. And it was very like, the fact that someone would open up to you was like about this was, you know, very emotional, but also she really wanted to share. And the other women that I met, they really wanted to share, because they were like, this could touch other people. Like, we've never thought that we would experience this. And we've learned so many things over this period that we actually think could be helpful to other people in other situations, in other contexts. And, you know, so it's good for us to share, and it's good for us to try and make connections. And then I ended up, by the way, meeting Sergey. So on Christmas Eve, every day at the time, and it's probably still the same, they had what was nicknamed the love train. And so it arrived around 9:30 p.m. in the evening from the east. And so it would bring back a lot of people who were coming on leave, or their partners, maybe you'd spend time with them. And so I stayed on this platform and, you know, watched all these reunions between people who hadn't seen each other in so long. And it turned out, like, very coincidentally, that Irina and Sergey actually were reunited at the same time, because he had just been, you know, surprise given leave. And so I ended up like spending Stephen's Day with them. And yeah, that was great to meet him.
What was that platform like?
Yeah, it was just like people just waiting, like anxiously, basically just trying to see, were they going to be reunited with the like with the person, like, because I guess there's always anxiety. Did they really make it? You know, are they actually going to be on the train? People with balloons, you know, balloons that read "I love you," things like that. Yeah, it was quite beautiful.
And interesting what you said there about, you know, we never thought we'd live through this, and there's so much that changes about the world that we live in so quickly. And one of my best friends lives up in Finland, and my godson is up there, and he turned 18, so they have conscription up there as well. And it's a very different world up there now, even compared to they were 4 or 5 years ago, because they share such a huge border with Russia, and they are, you know, they're all kind of getting into preparation mode, is how she described it. And she never thought, you know, 10 years ago when I met her on a bus traveling around Australia and Byron Bay, she never thought that her son would be in a situation like this, where their war is very much a possibility. Right. Hands up if you have ever been in a situation where you're just not feeling well. Maybe you're a little under the weather, maybe you're in a little bit of pain, and you're just thinking to yourself, I need to see somebody right now. We have all been there. And you need to know about the Matter Private's emergency departments in Dublin and Cork. Because when you're under the weather, being seen quickly is really all that matters. And their consultancy-led teams aim to see every patient within 20 minutes of arrival. How good is that? This streamlined approach continues right the way throughout your care. So if you do need a scan, an X-ray, an MRI or an ultrasound, they can get those tests done and the results back to you really quickly, which means your medical team can work out the best treatment plan for you as soon as possible. And that is what it's about, getting that specialist care to you without delay. Now, just a quick note, it is for over 16s only, and do remember to check the opening times. The Matter Private Emergency in Dublin is open every day, 8 to 7, and in Cork, it's Monday to Friday, 8 to 8. So if you're not feeling well and you need specialised medical treatment, remember, you've got the Matter Private Network's emergency department. Get all the details you need and a full list of services at matterprivate.ie. Sorted. Tell me about your time in Rwanda. You've got a beautiful story, which I think is the next chapter in the book.
Yeah, and I think you actually went to Rwanda pretty much at the same time as me that first time. I went there in 2014 for the first time. And I mean, it was my first kind of professional foreign assignment. I had this reporting grant. And the Irish Times said, if I go, I can do coverage for them. So I basically booked like a one-way ticket because I had been doing an internship in London. I just graduated. I was 24. I went and stayed in this, they give you a grant and you could stay like for a short period of time in a nice hotel. And I was like, no, I'm going to stretch it as long as possible. So I got a one-way flight and kind of stayed in this hostel room above a bowling alley and got motorbikes everywhere and just decided I'm going to meet as many people as I can and do as many things as I can. And I learned a lot on that trip. But one of the groups of people that I met were students who were with this organization. It had been organized by this organization called ERG. They were called Artificial Families. And so what they did was kind of set up groups they called them genocide orphans. Some of them did have a parent, but like a lot of their family had been killed during the genocide in 1994. And they were set up in groups, and a father, what they called a father and a mother, were appointed. I mean, they were all roughly the same age, but they'd meet up like twice a week or once a week maybe. And basically just the father and mother would be like, have you been doing your studies? Have you been behaving? Like, what have you, do you have any problems? Anything you want to talk about? It was just kind of a way of maintaining support. And so I met them the first time 2014, and then when I was writing the book 2024, it was 10 years later, I decided I'm going to track them down and see what's happened. And it was really, I don't know, just amazing to see this kind of like, it made me question a lot of things, to be honest, like what is a family, and how important a family can be to us. And is there any kind of way to replace that if you lose it? And I think that, it was very, again, they really wanted to share, because they were like, we had this experience and this is what we came up with. And there's obviously, things about it that worked and things about it that maybe didn't work so much. And they wanted to, just share that experience.
It's amazing. And I'd never heard that when I was out there in 2014 as well. And for me, what was really, I remember what really stood out for me when I was in Rwanda was that there was very old people and very young people, but there was very few people that I would notice in their teens and 20s. And we were out there doing a documentary talking about, I sent you the article, they're talking about the power of music and how music was used detrimentally throughout the genocide to kind of incite violence between the Hutus and the Tutsis. And then kind of how it's been used to heal. But what was so striking was that, like, that was in our lifetime, like, 20 years ago. And to think that atrocity could happen. And then you look at what's happening in Gaza, you look at what's happening in Palestine, and you just go, Jesus, what has changed? For me, I suppose I was interested to read about your grandmother as well, because my grandmother, before I did that trip to Rwanda, my grandmother died the day that I was flying out, and I had to make a decision. My producer had already gone out there, and this was something that was really important for us to do. We really wanted to do this documentary, and my producer had already flown out, and I had to make the decision in the nursing home whether I was going to get on the flight and go and miss her funeral, or actually stay. And I made the decision to go because I felt that it was so important, and we'd kind of done so much work on it that it was something that I really needed to do, and I suppose in your line of work, and you live abroad, you live away, and you mentioned, I think in an article somewhere, that it was the same. You lost your grandmother, and you were, where were you?
In Syria.
In Syria. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I kind of had the same as you're talking about, in that my granny, I mean, she was in her 90s, and she was like, we were kind of told, she doesn't have that long left, and I was going to come back. It was during 2024. So the war in Lebanon had been happening, and then there was a ceasefire in Lebanon. And then basically, I was almost ready to come back to Ireland, and then the Syrian regime fell. And so I spoke to my family, and they said, I said, what do you think? Because basically we knew the next day we could cross into Syria, and I'm sure people know about the Assad regime, but it was like a very momentous moment. And they said, you go ahead because I also knew once I go into Syria, it's going to be very hard to get out again.
Yeah.
For at least, I just didn't, it was very chaotic. So I just didn't know for how long I'd be there. And even like if there would be internet and things like that. So, I crossed the border. In the end, I decided, okay, I'll go, crossed. And then, I talk about it very briefly in the book. We went to Sednaya prison, where people were searching for missing loved ones, which again, if people don't know, like there's more than 100,000, I think, people still missing in Syria. And when the Assad regime fell, huge numbers, like thousands, descended on Sednaya prison, which was the most kind of notorious prison where people were being held, political prisoners. And so we went there, and I was inside there when my granny died. And it was a very kind of strange moment, because in one sense you're like, well, I'm reporting on everybody else's grief, like the grief around me is like completely towering me, or completely towering my grief. And then of course I have my grief as well. So I didn't talk about it that much in the book, but I kind of wanted to mention it because yeah, I guess it's like a thing that can, again, connect us all in a way, you know, like all of these feelings, all of the love that we have for family members, the grief, like all of that, it happens to all of us at some point, you know. And yeah.
Can I ask you about your family? Because you're living in Beirut, and I feel that there's not enough coverage of as to actually what is happening in Lebanon at the moment. I don't think Irish people are as aware as they should be as to actually what is happening there. You're living there. You have a flat there. You've been there for the last number of years. How do your parents and your friends and your family and your loved ones, like, it must be kind of quite scary for them, the idea of you going back. I know you're going back in a couple of days' time. Have you thought about leaving to come home, or is that your home now? Is Beirut your home? Do you feel like when you're back in Ireland it's home? Where do you sit with all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I've lived a lot of places now. So I lived in London for, I think, 5.5 years after I graduated, and I was working as a journalist there. And then I lived in Uganda for a few years, and then Sierra Leone. And yeah, I've been in Beirut. Sierra Leone's West Africa. Then I've been in Beirut for the last, since January 2024. So I think that my family, they got a shock, I would say, when the war escalated in 2024. And that was, I think, their first experience of me living in a place that was really, you know, in the global headlines. And it took some time to, just to, even for me, to be honest, like to figure out, you know, to get your bearings, to figure out what is the, how to live in that environment. And then for me to explain that to them. I mean, I'm an adult, you know, so I do what I do. You know, I make my own choices, but of course, yeah, you have a responsibility to kind of explain and to reassure people who are close to you about what you're doing. And yeah, it's been tricky as well because I wanted family members to come and visit me, and there was obviously a ceasefire, but it was kind of like they call it a one-sided ceasefire, you know, so there were still attacks in that period, but you know, yeah, we were hoping that it was going to be more peaceful and they could come and visit. And then obviously the war escalated again. So yeah,
and do you feel from a work perspective and from a personal perspective, do you feel a desire to stay? Because I follow your posts on Instagram, and even the power of you putting up those photographs of the images of the airstrikes in the direct aftermath of the airstrikes in Beirut. They're so powerful, and those pictures say 1,000 words, you know. As it escalates and as things maybe will continue to escalate, like, where's your head at in terms of staying versus going?
Yeah, I mean, I need to say, like, so when I moved to Beirut, there wasn't like an all-out war. There was kind of war more at the border areas, but it wasn't in Beirut, and there really like wasn't in no way was it in like definite that this was going to happen. Like, I didn't know that there was going to be war like there was, and you know, most people definitely didn't think, or like most people I spoke to, they certainly didn't see it as an inevitability. And it wasn't that I moved there being like, you know, I'm going to live in a war zone. I actually moved there. So I was on a break from reporting, and people can read, there's a chapter in the book that focuses more on Lebanon's economic crisis. And I started reporting that in 2023. So I'd been there for like, I think a month or two in 2023. And I'd been visiting Beirut since 2016. I was there as well in 2017. And yeah, then basically a friend had a free room in his apartment. And so I was on this reporting break to write the book. And I was like, I'll just go out and stay with him. I like Beirut, you know, it's a very vibrant city. And I moved in January 2024. And then the war. So actually, I didn't even, because I work for the Irish Times, I didn't actually tell them I had moved there until I came back from this reporting break in the summer. And I said, oh, by the way, I live in Beirut now. And they were like, okay, that's fine. You know, you can report in around there if you want. And I then, I still wasn't even reporting because I was doing various other projects in different places. And then when the war escalated in September, that was when I started reporting in Lebanon. So, yeah, of course, at that point, you then feel like you have a duty to cover it. So at that point, then I was like, well, I have to cover this, this is really important. And it's, I'm here. I know people, like I'm well connected already. Like I knew, to a certain extent how to move around and how to operate. So at that point, of course, you have to cover it, but it wasn't, I'm sorry, I'm just explaining this way because it wasn't that I was like, I didn't move with the purpose of doing that. It was that it happened and then I had to react to it. And I do think that, yeah, like now, I mean, and since the Assad regime fell as well, I can move between Syria and Lebanon, which is like pretty amazing because foreign journalists were pretty much barred from Syria, including me, under the Assad regime. So again, it's like, it feels like important to be providing coverage from there. And I think that Irish media, I think that it's definitely contributing something, or I'd like to believe it's contributing something that people can access that coverage. But yeah, I think that I don't know. I mean, I'm just carrying on, I don't have like a massive long-term plan. It's just you see something that feels very important and then you respond to it. A lot of the time when I hear this being spoken about, it's in these very detached terms and like very kind of sterile terms that don't really reflect what I'm seeing in terms of the impact on, on humans. And yeah, what you were talking about in regards photos. So one of the things that I started doing after in 2024, and then I ended up doing it again this year, I was on so many airstrike sites. After an airstrike hit, we just go down and figure out what had happened. And I feel like if you see an airstrike site from a distance, you just kind of see a massive gray, you don't really know what you're seeing and it could be anything. And then when you got closer, I started seeing all these like symbols of civilian life, even the other day I found or in April, I think a 1960s mystery novel or family photos. Normally I don't publish the family photos without blurring the faces because, we don't know what has happened to these people in all cases. Just loads of different things. I mean, I started posting them on Instagram and on different social media. And the Irish Times actually at one point ran like a photo essay of, basically, it was called like things I've seen in the rubble of Israeli airstrikes in the last week. And so I was posting those in 2024. And then again, when the war started or escalated this year, I started doing that again. And I think that touches people in a way because it's like they can see these items, like Uno cards, for example. Or
yeah. And as a mother, like it is seeing the kids' teddies, it's seeing the Dumbo VHS tapes, and like when you're looking at the news and you have Israel saying that they were targeting Hezbollah zones, you just go, it just, as you said, it brings the humanity and the cost of human life and the day-to-day normality of human life just been blown apart.
Yeah, like that. Exactly that. April 8th, those attacks, I think Israel said officially they were hitting command and control centers. And I went to, I think, 9 different sites. At least I haven't counted the final tally, but, one was like a supermarket and one was a residential building where exactly those Dumbo VHS tapes were. One was a pharmacy where I saw like a lot of, medication on the ground and saw nappies, children's nappies. And we actually ended up for that one getting a CCTV video of the moment the strike struck, and you could see like someone pushing a pram in front of where the strike hit. I went to a lot of sites, a cafe as well, where one man told me how his children survived because they had been behind the crepe stand. And so it was just by chance that they were there and they survived. I think that exactly a lot of the kind of language about what's being hit, it doesn't show that. And the only way you can show that is by being on the ground and really like examining the scenes and then trying to convey that. But it is tricky because one thing I learned in like living through war the last few years is like you start to normalize things yourself because you're like, there's no other way to exist in this environment, So I say this, I'm not saying this to sound sorry for myself or anything. It makes me think, the journalists in Gaza, they've been living like this, for so much longer with no way to get out of that environment and no way to escape. And the fact that they continue to report and, that bravery is really astounding.
That's what I wanted to ask you. Like, how do you protect yourself, protect your own mental health? And like you say, you're doing a small amount of reporting compared to those in Gaza, but you've seen a lot and you've witnessed a lot, and continuing now to live in somewhere like Beirut where you're going out and capturing those images of the airstrikes. How do you protect your own boundaries?
This is like the type of question that I'm being asked a lot the last week, and I don't have like a clear answer for it. I think that like I try and do, I work as much as I can. I mean, I report as much as I can. I would say it's probably not enough. And sorry, I said Palestinian, like journalists in Gaza and Palestinians there, but also Lebanese colleagues, some of them are displaced from the south. They've lost their homes. They've lost so many colleagues as well. And, I'm seeing Lebanese colleagues who are, again, they don't have an escape from this. Like this is their life, and they're being targeted. And I'm sure people know about some of those horrific targeted killings. For me, I guess, I'm doing what I can, but I think that you have to be conscious to a certain extent about your mental health, because you also don't want to be taking it out on other people. And I think that I've been like, it's been quite helpful in a way. Helpful is the wrong word, but like I have a lot of friends and colleagues who, like in Beirut, obviously, because I live there, like I have lots of networks there, and people are going through similar things, and we talk about it. Like, for example, like the Israeli drone is above you a lot of the time, and it's like very loud. And for me, I've realized like about 3 days is the max that I start like getting very irritable and angry if, I'm hearing it for 3 days. And like, you just have to be quite conscious of your own behaviors and your own reactions, and when to take a break and when to just take a day off or whatever, because you don't want to be getting angry at other people. Like everybody's going through similar things. So this is being done often with US weapons, this is being done with the kind of involvement of other countries. So it's not just a situation in Lebanon. It's something that, obviously involves Israel, but involves,
so many other countries. I think I read something yesterday that there was 52 different countries involved in arming Israel. So, I mean, then you're taught that's what you're talking. It's the global issue. But anyway, that's for a different podcast.
Yeah. And I should say, I'm talking here about the civilian impact. So, obviously to get into all of the politics around it and the reasoning behind, it's for another discussion, but here I'm talking specifically about the civilian impact, which is like more than 1 million people displaced, like a huge proportion, or sorry, I forget now the exact territory, but like the south of Lebanon now being occupied, and more than 55 villages, I think it is now, being demolished. And we can have a separate conversation about Hezbollah and Israel and all of this, but specifically civilian impact, it's unimaginable. It's massive.
One of those villages that you talked about, which is now occupied by Israel, features in your book as well. You have a chapter on Lebanon, and it is about the love of family, and it is about the kind of that protection that we feel when it comes to our loved ones. And it's a beautiful story about a father and a son, if you want to recount it for us.
Yeah, so this is a story about Bassam, so I'm sure people know, but like Lebanon has been through various crises, and one was the economic crisis. And it kind of started in 2019, but it didn't really start. Like there's a much bigger history to it, but it became very evident in 2019. And what happened was that the banks effectively seized everybody's deposits. So if you had spent, your whole life saving money, or if you had, like in Bassam's case, I think he had inherited an apartment from his family, and he had sold that, and he had the money from that apartment in the account. All of that was seized, so everybody's money was seized. And he then needed to so his father had an accident and needed medical care, and he basically decided he was going to raid the bank to get out his own money, which he needed to take care of his father and his family. So he took a gun and a gallon of gasoline and just raided this bank and ended up in a hostage situation, holding people hostage. And the very strange thing about this was that it became, it obviously hit the headlines very quickly, but then people started gathering to cheer him on. So around the bank, there ended up being this big crowd of supporters who were saying,
while he's still in the bank,
saying, this is great, we support him. And even a local restaurant sent over food because they were like, we want to support your raid of the bank. And Bassam ended up...
And who did he have hostage? Like, with all the bank workers?
Yeah, so originally it was bank workers and customers, but he then released the customers and ended up just with the bank workers. And he, eventually this ended, but the strange thing was that he then became a national hero. So, or not strange, but, the unexpected thing maybe. And so, people basically were like, he's not the thief, like the thief is the bankers and the thief is the state. And so Bassam, I met him the first time 2023, I think, which was the year after he had done the bank raid. And we met and we spoke about what had happened, and we spoke about his father as well, his love for his father. And what was interesting was that there was kind of a series of raids that took place after his raid, and so many of them also were people who had family members who needed medical care, who also needed, because also Lebanon, the health system had kind of collapsed and you needed to pay for specific medical care. And so it was more people who were basically looking for medical care for their family members. And again, for me, that's kind of a story about love, And so then Bassam, I met him again 2024, and his father had since died. And they were from, like, the family originally was from one of the border villages. And he described, like, going back to bury his father and needing to get, like, military permission. And, there was an Israeli drone overhead and there was an attack nearby. And since then, their village has become one of the inaccessible ones. So it's one of the areas past the so-called yellow line. So it kind of, like, shows as well, how so many lives can be touched in so many ways by all the crises. It's like,
of all the love stories in the book, Sally, is there one that sticks out for you the most, one that kind of impacted you the most?
No, to be honest, I would say like all of them, because I think that they're all slightly different stories. None of them is the exact same kind of, I don't know if type of love is the right way to say it, but it's all different experiences and different, I think that all of them are really really powerful. I think that even for me it was interesting to kind of examine the different I don't know if stages is the right word, but like you mentioned before, the Japan chapter, and that's right at the end, and that like looks more at grief. And I think that one for me was very kind of beautiful. It gave me, beautiful is probably the wrong word, but it's both about like love for people who have died and how you maintain that if you want to maintain that, and like how you go forward with that, but also about the power of community again, I guess, or the power of people to kind of help each other through a crisis. And I think that it was pretty amazing to talk to people there, and to see how time can to a certain extent heal certain things. Not that it solves, not that it makes like grief go away or anything like that, but that it does. People should read it, because I think that the people who speak in it, they're the best ones to, like, listening to their voices is the best.
And I think that's what I love about this book. It's not about love conquers all and, love will reign over everything, but it is a really important reminder of the power of love and connection and community and family and all of those things. And I think it's one of the contributors in the book talks about, was it Irina talks about love being one of the most powerful weapons in a time of crisis. I just thought that it's so true.
Yeah, it's true. And it can be hard to remember as well. And I do think it's worth saying, like, love as I see it, it isn't just about like expressed love. It isn't like, I mean, we all know from our own lives, right? You don't go around telling everybody you love that you love them every day. A lot of it is about actions, and it's about, it can exist without it being expressed. And it's not necessarily about relationships as well. Like it can be just people doing good things in my reading of it, you know? And I think that, yeah, I mean, it's not that love conquers all, but like sometimes we need to remember that it exists.
100%. And like this podcast is called Are We There Yet? It feels like in a kind of a safe world full of justice, we are so far from that. In your line of work, and I suppose after writing this book, are you hopeful with the current state of the world?
No, I would say no. I'm definitely not hopeful. But like hope, well, someone told me before, hope is an action. And so like hope you don't need to feel hopeful to act in a way that is hopeful, if that makes sense. And I do think that like a lot of like, yeah, there's a lot going wrong with the world. I mean, who has power and, you know, growing inequality and like a lot also I think is because if people know my previous work, like when I reported on migration, for example, I reported a lot on how certain voices are being silenced and how there's a lot of distancing. And so like our policies, like how like what's being done in our name as Europeans basically, and how like we are implicated effectively in crimes against humanity in the Mediterranean and in Libya. And like, I don't think that I would like to believe that that couldn't happen if people were more like if people knew exactly what was happening. And I think that there are a lot of systems being set up now to ensure that we basically don't know everything that's happening, which sounds kind of strange because obviously we do have access to a certain extent, you know, to things through our phones. But I also think that, yeah, there are definitely voices being silenced and there's a lot of disinformation. And, you know, there's a lot of also just encouraging people to just totally detach. I think that that's definitely taking place. And I think that, yeah, I would like people to, like, I think that change happens on a macro and micro level and like everybody can create change. And I think it's very dangerous if we start believing that we can't. And yeah, in one sense, maybe systems and structures and, you know, much bigger inequalities or injustices, it's difficult to see change happening, but I still think that's not a reason to not be hopeful, if that makes sense. So in one sense, like I'm not hopeful because I'm just really exhausted. And in another sense, I'm like, well, we can't lose the idea that we have to be hopeful. Does that make sense?
100%. You know, particularly in the last couple of years, just a big thank you. And I know you're probably going to, you know, hate me saying that, but thank you for the work that you do and that your colleagues do to bring information to us. But also a book like this, again, it just reminds us of, the humanity behind the headlines. And I think that is so important. And I think if a lot more reporting was done from that perspective, maybe that's a change that we need to see. Do you think that's a change that we need to see? That we're reporting the information, but like that we come at it from a more human angle?
Yeah, I mean, I should say you're saying thank you to me for my work. I should say I definitely don't feel like I do enough. Like, and of course I'm not the only journalist, and there's lots of journalists who are, you know, doing really important and brave reporting and human reporting, I would say. But yeah, I do think that, I mean, part of the issue as well with journalism, which I address in the book, is just like format and, you know, when I'm writing a news article, for example, a lot of the time I have a few hundred words, or, you know, if you're doing a radio piece, not this podcast, obviously, but like a radio piece, you might be given a few minutes and it's like, how much can you fit into that? And yeah, of course you have to reduce kind of, the reality of what's happening. And often also journalists are under a lot of pressure and they don't have time to get voices from people directly affected. Or what's happening more now, I would say, is that people directly affected also don't want to talk because they're feeling like nothing changes. Like there's just this, particularly I think since 2023 and with Gaza. And I think that people are feeling like they, you know, like what's the point anymore, that nothing is changing and everybody is seeing this. And I think I hear this in the Middle East a lot, certainly, is that people just feel like so disheartened with the media and so disheartened with, with, I don't know, with everything, I guess. It's hard because, of course, we need to yeah, we need to maintain that view that humans exist at the center of geopolitics. And it sounds so basic, but like it isn't necessarily, you know. I referenced in the epilogue, I did a talk in the European Parliament a few years ago after my first book came out. And I literally projected the definition of dehumanization on the screen because I thought that this was important, because I think that everybody should be questioning, you know, language, you know, even sound bites. And like we all see them from politicians, or the one you quoted from Elon Musk, or like, you know, we should be questioning. I think it's important to be challenged and to challenge ourselves and to each other as journalists, but also as humans, you know.
Thanks a million for coming in and chatting to me today. The book is called This Is Also a Love Story, Searching for Good in a Divided World. It's really brilliant. Sally Hayden, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Right. Hands up if you have ever been in a situation where you're just not feeling well. Maybe you're a little under the weather. Maybe you're in a little bit of pain and you're just thinking to yourself, I need to see somebody right now. We have all been there. And you need to know about the Matter Private's emergency departments in Dublin and Cork. Because when you're under the weather, being seen quickly is really all that matters. And their consultancy-led teams aim to see every patient within 20 minutes of arrival. How good is that? This streamlined approach continues right the way throughout your care. So if you do need a scan, an X-ray, an MRI or an ultrasound, they can get those tests done and the results back to you really quickly, which means your medical team can work out the best treatment plan for you as soon as possible. And that is what it's about, getting that specialist care to you without delay. Now, just a quick note, it is for over 16s only, and do remember to check the opening times. The Matter Private Emergency in Dublin is open every day, 8 to 7, and in Cork, it's Monday to Friday, 8 to 8. So if you're not feeling well and you need specialised medical treatment, remember, you've got the Matter Private Network's emergency department. Get all the details you need and a full list of services at matterprivate.ie. Sorted. You've been listening to Are We There Yet? Hosted by me, Kathryn Thomas. Visual design and video edit by Stephen King O'Farrell and Connor Daly. Music courtesy of Audio Network. Series producer Paul McGregor and executive producer Sasha Hamrogue. New episodes of Are We There Yet? Are released every Tuesday morning wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also watch this episode along on YouTube. Are We There Yet? with Kathryn Thomas is an Onic original.